Alrighty, I'm very excited to present a compare and contrast between Kantian ethics and utilitarianism. This is going to be a video lecture, hoping to span about 10 to 12 minutes here. And for a brief outline of the goal of this lecture, I'm going to go through and give a brief description and give the basic tenets of both utilitarianism as well as Kantian ethics. Spend a couple minutes on each of those. And then we'll move into a few philosophical and moral dilemmas to discuss how utilitarians as well as Kantians would approach each of the dilemmas, to possibly expose some flaws in each of the philosophical ideologies, as well as to maybe see some strengths. With that stated, the goal is, after a thorough investigation of utilitarianism and Kantian ethics, we will try and decide which philosophical ideology presents the greatest opportunity for living a successful life. I will be drawing upon a variety of sources from our main class readings, both by James Rachel's. I'm going to be using the categorical imperative, as well as the universal law article on Kantianism, as well as the article on utilitarianism, again, both by James Rachel's. I have two additional articles, one by Philippa Foot, entitled Utilitarianism and the Virtues, as well as one from David Kaminsky called Kantian Consequentialism. I also drew some examples from the Crash Course Philosophy video series on YouTube, which is sponsored by PBS, one on utilitarianism and one on Kantian ethics as well. So to dive straight in, we're going to begin with a discussion on utilitarianism. Utilitarianism is a philosophy which focuses solely on the consequences of actions and completely ignores the intentions of said actions. The only thing that matters is the result of those actions. The main principle of utilitarianism, it's often called the principle of utility. It states that we must work to produce the greatest good for the greatest number of sentient beings. So as we are to consider anything throughout, consider any choices or actions that are to be taken or not taken, the number one thing a utilitarian would look at is how much pleasure this produces, as well as how much pain. Utilitarians are always seeking to produce the maximum amount of pleasure, as opposed to, and while limiting the amount of pain caused. This is a philosophy that was taught as early as James Bentham, and a major proponent was also John Stuart Mill. The interesting thing about utilitarianism is it appears wonderful at the outset. Producing the greatest amount of good for the greatest number of people seems very easy, or maybe not very easy, but a worthy goal. A possible issue is something that's called the theory of transitivity. So in our search for the greatest good possible, there is an issue where we might run into causing a few individuals a significant amount of pain if it produces a amount of pleasure for a certain number of individuals that is able to outweigh those other individuals' pain. So this theory of transitivity would state that if, to use a mathematical formula, if A is less than B and B is less than C, then A must be less than C. So to give an example, if we were to say, how many broken bones would we have to save, or let's go more extreme, how many amputations would we have to prevent in order to justify the murder of one individual? Would it have to be 100? 1,000? Let's go to the extreme and say, if we could prevent 1 billion amputations, would that be worth the murder of one individual? Perhaps. For the sake of this argument, we'll say yes. That if we were able to spare people the pain and injury of 1 billion amputations, that would be worth one life. Now, how many how much common cold would we have to prevent in order to produce more pleasure than 1 billion amputation preventions? To make it simple, let's say 1 trillion. If we were to eradicate the common cold, is that worth more pleasure or preventing more pain than 1 billion amputations? Yes, let's say yes. Based on the theory of transitivity, we would then have to state that we would be willing to murder one person to eliminate the common cold. Something that doesn't cause any lasting effects, something that doesn't cause much pain. It's just a little discomfort. It's mildly annoying. Is that worth murdering one individual? According to the theory of transitivity, yes. Moving on into Kantianism. Kantianism is absolute moral law. That is its basic tenet, that morality has a set of laws that are immutable, that cannot be changed. In the article that we read by James Rachel's, they talked about hypothetical imperatives. And these do not equal morality because they are optional. They follow the ought rule. If you want money, then you ought to get a job. If you want good grades, then you ought to study. But these things are optional because if you don't care about getting good grades, you don't need to study. If you don't care about having a lot of money, you don't need to work very hard or have a job at all. The reason that Kant does not believe that these are, or that these don't pertain to morality, or that these are not absolute moral laws, is because they are optional. This leads Kant to discuss something called the categorical imperative, and it's also mentioned as well in James Rachel's article that we read on universal law. These categorical imperatives are commands that must be followed regardless of desire. A couple common examples would be you cannot commit murder, you shouldn't lie, cheat, steal. Any of those things would be prohibited by Kantian ethics. A good way to think about this is following the golden rule. And this universal law is, if you would be okay with stealing, then everybody should be able to steal. You can't say, oh, I'm just going to steal this time because I have an exception. This would have to be a universal law that you'd be able to apply to everyone if you would be okay with everybody stealing or everybody murdering or lying. So Kantian ethics breaks down into that universal law, and the additional point is that we must respect autonomy. That human beings themselves are autonomous individuals. They are not means to an end. For example, this pair of tweezers serves a purpose. You know, I can pick up small things. I use them for working on electronics. I can pick up small, tiny screws, pick them up or place them however or whatever I need to use them for. But as soon as these tweezers cease to fulfill their purpose, if they break, get bent, whatever, I can get rid of it, toss it out. I don't need to consider what this tweezer's goals are. It doesn't have a goal. It was a means to an end. Human beings are not means to an end. They are autonomous individuals that have their own goals. As such, they must be respected, and their autonomy cannot be distorted. That's where a lot of this ideology of lying and stealing comes into play. I cannot lie to you because that would distort your autonomy. If I were to ask you for $500 so that I could buy some philosophy textbooks, you might say, sure, yeah, that seems like a worthy goal. But if I'm actually planning on spending that $500 on a plane ticket to Paris to just go see the Eiffel Tower or to eat good food, that is misrepresenting my intentions with that money and thus distorting your autonomy, which is why under Kantian ethics that is prohibited. So keeping the basic ideologies from utilitarianism in mind, as well as from Kantianism of the universal law and autonomy, as well as the principle of utility from utilitarianism and the theory of transitivity, let's move into a couple examples. We're going to begin with a very common one, the trolley problem. However, I'm going to deviate from the standard trolley problem and explain a slightly different example. Imagine a runaway train is going down a track, and you find yourself on a bridge over the track with another individual. And the train is moving across the track this way, And over here are 5 individuals laying on the track. You are, and your bridge are between the train and those 5 individuals. Would you, placing yourself in that situation of being on the bridge, if you were to push the other individual you were with off of the bridge onto the train track, the train would hit that individual, causing the train the conductor to realize and slow down and stop the train before hitting those other 5 people, thus saving and sparing their lives. What would you do? A utilitarian, thinking about the principle of utility, would say yes. We are under a moral obligation to push that one individual off of the bridge into the path of the train, because that will prevent the other 5 individuals from being hit and dying. Under Kantian ethics, we are prohibited from pushing that individual off because we do not want to inflict pain, or we do not want to cause any action that we would not be okay with if the roles were reversed. We must always follow universal law, and Kantian ethics prohibits murder, and so we will not push that individual off. Another common example is the organ harvesting example, where if a healthy individual goes to a hospital, and it is discovered that if their organs were to be harvested, the lives of 5 other people could be saved. The utilitarian, again, would say, yes, we should harvest these organs from this one individual, causing a small amount of pain, but the overall pleasure generated by saving 5 lives would greatly outweigh the pain, thus making it a morally correct decision. Kantian ethics, again, would prohibit the murder of one individual to spare others due to the prohibition of murder under a universal law. Another example is the example given by philosopher Bernard Williams. An individual in a foreign country is exploring the jungle as an honored guest. As they're walking through the jungle, they happen upon a group of 20 individuals that are being escorted by military men. The leader of the military, recognizing you as a distinguished guest, notifies you that these 20 people are going to all be murdered because they are political dissidents. But if you would kill one of them, the lives of the other 19 would be spared. Under utilitarian ethics, the murder of one individual is justified because the pleasure or the good generated by the action of murdering one, a small amount of pain, greatly is outweighed because of the 19 lives that are saved. So another way to think about it is I am not murdering one individual, I am saving 19 others by doing what I must do. A Kantian, again, as common with all of the others, prohibits murder, and so therefore would not cause any harm to those individuals, and any action to prohibit that would cause you to be at fault. If you were to murder one individual, that would make you a murderer. This is an interesting example because I liken it to the movie The Avengers. There's a line in the first Avengers movie where Captain America asks Tony Stark, he simply states, "You're not the one to lay yourself down on the wire to let the other guy pass over you." And Tony Stark says, "I think I would just cut the wire." So while Kantian ethics would prevent you from, let's say, lying, or in this situation of the jungle example, it would prevent you from murdering that individual, it does not state that you have to go along with it. You could definitely ask and try to persuade the military men against that murder. You could also feign ignorance. "I don't speak your language. I'm sorry, I don't know what you're saying." Just pretend that you don't understand and walk away. The final example comes from our own readings from Ursula K. Le Guin of those who walked away from Amalus. This is a perfect example of the utilitarian dilemma. One individual is placed under extremely poor circumstances, causing them a great amount of pain, but that pain is outweighed by the massive pleasure and good for all of the people. However, those individuals, once they see and come to realize where their pleasure comes from, walk away. They don't know where to. It is undescribable. Perhaps they awakened unto Kantian ethics, where they realized that it doesn't matter how much pleasure I am receiving. If it causes pain for that one individual, it is not good, and so I must leave. So based upon these discussions and looking at the examples given these philosophical dilemmas, in my opinion, I believe that Kantian ethics provides people the greatest opportunity to lead a successful life due to the fact that you treat others the way you would want to be treated under the universal law. You do not have any expectations for other people that are beyond that or you don't expect anything of them more than you would expect of yourself. In addition, you do not have to condone negative actions. You can strive to talk people out of it or to find ways around it, even though there may be a positive outcome or positive benefit. Kantian ethics and Kantians would seek to find another option. They always try to cut the wire. Thank you.